everyone. Please welcome Leela. Let's give her a big round of applause.
When the millionaire's daughter asked her blind maid to sing at her 16th birthday party, the invitation was a trap. On stage, the former Juilliard prodigy faced 200 guests who were waiting for her humiliation. The birthday girl smiled, ready to crush a light that wasn't hers. But they were expecting tears, and they would get a firestorm. What happened next wasn't a fall. It was a power shift so shocking it would change everyone's life forever. The world held its breath. Before we jump into the story, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and let's begin. Inside the walls of the Harrison estate, the California sun seemed to lose its warmth. It was a cold glare that spread across the marble and glass, a brilliance that illuminated luxury, but offered no life. Lila moved through this space like a methodical ghost. Her steps followed a mental map, a choreography of repetition and need to master the darkness that surrounded her. That morning, her task was the grand piano, a black Steinway that was, for her, both a sanctuary and a tomb. She dusted it with a reverent delicacy, but her fingers betrayed the task. They remembered. They glided over the ivory keys without a sound, tracing silent chords from pure muscle memory. An entire sonata unfolded in her mind, so vivid she could almost hear the applause echoing in the room. The spotlight at Juilliard had been an embrace. At 20, her eyes had shone with the same intensity as the keys beneath her fingers. There was passion on her face, but also an invincible pride, the certainty of someone who knows the world belongs to her. The thunderous sound of that memory was shattered by a sharp, real noise. Back in the present, her foot had bumped into a small table. A silver picture frame fell, the glass shattering on the floor. Lila's heart pounded. A mistake. A slip. In that house, mistakes weren't just accidents. They were sentences, audible proof of her incompetence, an invitation for the contempt she always felt lurking. Before the panic could take hold, a warm hand covered hers. "Leave it, mija. I've got it." It was Maria, the housekeeper, whose voice carried the warmth the mansion lacked. She had traded the stages of New York for the silent corridors of Beverly Hills. Every day was a battle, not just to adapt, but to silence the echoes of the music and the person she once was. Her only other refuge was the garden, with Caleb, the gardener. Unlike the others, he didn't treat her with pity. He painted the world for her with words. "The yellow roses have that peachy color on the inside today, you know? The ones you said were your favorite." It was an act of kindness so simple and profound that for a few moments, Lila's darkness felt a little less lonely. But peace was always temporary. Her singing teacher was correcting her for the third time on the same phrase, a note her mediocre voice refused to hit. It was in that moment of frustration that Scarlett Harrison looked out the window and saw the scene in the garden. She didn't see a moment of friendship. She saw the maid, the broken thing, receiving attention that should have been hers, and the contempt, already latent in her chest, found a reason to bloom. The Harrison mansion slept under the weight of its own opulence. The silence was deep, broken only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. For Lila, however, the night brought not rest, but a furtive freedom. It was the only time the house seemed to have no eyes, when she could be something more than the blind maid. Guided by memory and the chill of the cold marble under her bare feet, she found her way to the music room. A pale moonbeam cut through the space, landing on the grand piano like a solitary spotlight. The piano called to her. It always called. She stood before it, her breath held. To play it was a forbidden act, a betrayal of herself. It was poking a wound that never healed. Her hands rose but hovered inches from the keys, trembling. For weeks she had resisted. But tonight, the longing was stronger than the fear. With a sigh that was half surrender, half prayer, her fingers finally landed on the ivory. The first chords were hesitant, but then a melody began to emerge. It was hers. It was a song born in the absence of light, weaving together loss and resilience. But beneath the tapestry of sorrow, there was a stubborn thread of fury, a current of low notes that protested the darkness, a silent promise that this was not a lament, but a battle hymn being written. Leaning in, her voice joined the music, a fragile whisper, yet filled with the purity of a confession. Upstairs, Maria was finishing her rounds when a nearly imperceptible sound made her stop. Following the ghostly melody, she crept silently down to the music room door. She peeked through the crack, and what she saw made her hold her breath. Lila was at the piano, her face transfigured by a raw emotion. Maria didn't have to be an expert to hear the genius, to hear Lila's soul pouring out onto the keys. And she heard the pain. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She, who had come from Oaxaca with her own youthful dreams silenced by necessity, didn't just hear music. She heard the universal language of a trapped soul and recognized her own story in it. She understood that this was a sacred act, a secret. Slowly, so as not to make a sound, Maria backed away. Every step was a silent promise. She would say nothing. She would protect that flame. In the music room, the last note vanished. Lila sat motionless, the echo of her own soul resonating in the silence, unaware that for the first time in that house, someone had truly seen her. The same room where Lila found her nightly refuge was, by day, the stage for Scarlett's vanity. Her teacher, a woman with the patience of someone who is paid very well, gave a forced smile. "The note, Scarlett. You're not feeling the note," the teacher said with a nearly imperceptible sigh. "Power comes from the heart, not just the throat." It was in that exact moment of humiliation, averting her eyes to escape the critique, that Scarlett's gaze landed on Caleb and Lila in the garden. Caleb said something that made Lila throw her head back and laugh, a genuine free laugh that seemed to shine brighter than the sun. Scarlett's face transformed. That simple joy was something her expensive lessons and heiress status couldn't buy her. For Scarlett, who had everything, money, beauty, popularity, talent, and genuine joy were the only currencies she couldn't purchase. And the sight of someone as insignificant as Lila possessing what she most craved was like poison spreading through her veins. "Excuse me, Madame Dubois," Scarlett said, interrupting the lesson with a false sweetness. "I need a glass of water." She walked past two of her friends who were sitting on the sofa and shot them a knowing look. In the hallway, she saw Lila approaching, guiding herself along the wall. With a quick, calculated move, Scarlett placed her designer handbag, an object that cost more than Lila would make in a year, directly on the floor in the middle of the path. She and her friends watched with sly smiles. Lila continued on her way. Her foot caught violently on the bag, and she lost her balance, falling to her knees with a dull thud. Her splayed hands felt the sharp cold of the marble, and for an instant, the strong scent of expensive leather from the bag that had tripped her filled her senses. Scarlett and her friends' laughter rang out, loud and shrill. Lila, stunned and humiliated, remained on the floor, her face flushed. "Oh my," Scarlett said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Watch your step." She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. "Oh, that's right. You can't." In the days leading up to the party, the Harrison mansion became a vortex of feverish activity, a construction site of ostentation. A fleet of trucks unloaded not furniture but fantasies. Inside the ballroom, dozens of florists worked as if time were their enemy, erecting monumental arches of roses and hanging cascades of white orchids from the ceiling. Among them, event designers with headsets gestured, directing the installation of navy blue silk draping along the walls. On scaffolding, workers hung thousands of LED lights, positioned to simulate the sky. The theme, chosen by Scarlett, was A Starry Night, an irony as cruel as it was casual for the girl who lived in a perpetual night. The buzz extended to the industrial kitchen, where a renowned chef, flown in from Paris, inspected desserts that looked like edible jewels. From the doorway, Maria watched the scene for a moment, her expression weary, subtly shaking her head at the excess to celebrate one person. At the center of it all, Scarlet roamed like a queen inspecting her kingdom. "I want the ice sculpture bigger," she decreed to an assistant. At her side, Mr. Harrison supervised every detail not as a father, but as the CEO of a project. With his phone glued to his ear, he approved astronomical budgets with curt nods. He didn't give her his time, so he gave her the world. Every expensive detail was another brick in the wall he was building between his conscience and the daughter he was raising. With the press of a button, a technician tested the lights, and the ballroom ceiling exploded into a breathtaking galaxy. The image cuts sharply to a silent upstairs hallway. There, Lila moved slowly, her fingertips gliding along the wall to guide her, her own private sky devoid of any stars. The perfect stage for a girl's vanity was being set, but no one imagined the drama it was destined to host. A few feet from the opulence of the main hall, the service corridors of the mansion were another world, functional, narrow, and devoid of art. Scarlet was cutting through one of these hallways with visible impatience, on her way to the kitchen to give some order. The sound of her expensive shoes was the only thing that broke the silence. As she passed an alcove with linen closets, she heard hushed voices. It was Maria and another maid, Elena, folding towels. Scarlet normally would have walked right past, ignoring the staff's conversation like background noise. But one phrase made her stop. "So quiet. The poor thing," Elena was saying with pity in her voice. "Quiet, yes," Maria answered, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, almost reverent. "But her soul is not. The other night, by chance, I heard her, singing softly to herself." Maria paused, her eyes distant, as if reliving the moment. "It was the voice of an angel, Elena, pure as a prayer." The word angel hung in the air and hit Scarlet's ears like a challenge. She stood motionless in the hall, hidden by the curve in the wall. The annoyance on her face vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense stillness. Her eyes, once bored, now gleamed with a cold, calculating light. The pieces of her resentment and envy, which had been floating aimlessly in her mind, suddenly clicked together perfectly. The image of Lila, blind and vulnerable. The stage of her party, opulent and grand. And now, the secret. An angel's voice. A perverse idea, so brilliant in its cruelty, lit up in her mind. The perfect opportunity. It wasn't about music. It was about power. About turning beauty into a joke, light into darkness. The stage of her birthday party would not be a pedestal for her, but a trap for Lila. A slow, deliberate smile formed on Scarlet's lips. It was the smile of discovery, of someone who had just found the perfect weapon for the war she intended to wage. She turned, soundlessly, and walked back the way she came, completely forgetting what she was going to do in the kitchen. Her steps were no longer impatient, but measured, filled with a new and terrible purpose. Maria and Elena continued their work, completely unaware that their words of admiration had just sown the seed of the deepest humiliation. Dinner at the Harrison residence was a ritual of polished silences. The prevailing sound was the gentle clinking of silver cutlery against expensive china. Lila moved in the shadows of the room, refilling water in the crystal goblets, her presence functional, meant to be invisible. Mr. Harrison read emails on his tablet between bites, while Scarlet maintained a serene smile, waiting for the right moment. She found it when her father finally put down the tablet and looked at her with a rare moment of attention. "Are the party preparations to your liking, dear?" he asked. "They're perfect, Dad." "Thank you," Scarlet said, her voice like velvet. "And thinking about how lucky we are, I had a wonderful idea today." She turned in her chair, focusing her gaze on Lila, who had stopped near the sideboard. The gesture forced Mr. Harrison to notice the maid's presence. With a voice dripping with manufactured sincerity, Scarlet continued, "Dad, as an act of inspiration for all my friends, I would like for Lila to sing at my party." She paused, letting the shocking proposal settle, "to show everyone that no hardship, no darkness, can stop us from shining." Scarlet's words hung in the air, sweet and sticky like poison. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, to refuse, but she was paralyzed, pinned by the gaze of the father and daughter. Mr. Harrison, completely oblivious to the malice behind the act, broke into a wide, impressed smile. His daughter's cruelty, wrapped in the packaging of philanthropy, was invisible to him. "Scarlett, what a brilliant idea," he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the room. "What a generous and kind-hearted daughter I have." For Lila, the trap was perfect, and now it was shut. To say no was impossible. It would be an act of gross ingratitude, an affront to the Harrison heiress's kindness, and almost certainly the end of her job and her only means of survival. To say yes was to walk head-on into her own public execution. She was cornered, forced by the audience to thank her own executioner. Mr. Harrison's smiling face turned to her. "Well, Lila, what do you say? It's an honor, don't you think? A chance to show your talent." Trapped in that spotlight of unwanted attention, feeling Scarlett's victorious smile burning in her direction, Lila could only gather enough air for a whisper that sealed her fate. "Yes, Miss Scarlett, it would be an honor." Lila's room was a small annex in the staff wing, a modest and impeccably tidy space that contrasted starkly with the rest of the mansion. It was a sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a cell. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, motionless, her hands clasped in her lap. The echo of her own reply at dinner, "It would be an honor," still hummed in her ears like a sentence. A soft knock on the door startled her. The door opened slowly, and Maria's silhouette appeared. She said nothing at first, just stepped inside and closed the door behind her, wrapping the small room in a bubble of privacy. Her eyes, accustomed to seeing everything, landed on Lila with a painful tenderness. "I heard what happened at dinner," Maria said in a low voice, approaching and sitting next to Lila on the bed. Lila didn't answer, just swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening. Maria reached out and placed her hand over Lila's. They were hands that knew hard work, but her touch was immensely gentle. "Be careful, mija," she whispered, the word, "my child," filled with a genuine, protective affection. "You know what she's doing. That's not a stage. It's an arena, and she wants to see you bleed." Lila finally lifted her face, and in the dim light, Maria could see the glint of unshed tears in her eyes. With a fierce, silent intensity, Maria squeezed her hand. "Her stage can be an abyss for you," she continued, her voice firm. "But I know what you have in there." Her gaze was deep, and for an instant, Lila felt that Maria knew more than she was letting on. "Don't let her extinguish your light, no matter what." The concern in Maria's eyes was so real, so palpable, that it broke a small piece of Lila's dam of despair. A single tear rolled down her cheek. It wasn't an invitation to humiliation. It was a friend's warning, a weapon. Lila was still walking into the trap, but now, for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. The days that followed were a subtle kind of torture. Scarlett, under the pretense of helping Lila prepare, orchestrated small daily torments. She would pass Lila in the halls and ask in a loud, falsely concerned voice, "Are you rehearsing enough, Lila? My friends are so looking forward to your moment of inspiration." Every word was a reminder of the coming humiliation, another grain of weight on Lila's shoulders. The masterstroke, however, came 2 days before the party. Lila was polishing silverware in the dining room, focused on the methodical rhythm of her work, when Scarlett approached, the sound of her steps deliberately soft so as not to announce her. "Lila," Scarlett said, her voice dangerously sweet, "I brought you a gift, to help you." Lila turned toward the voice, her heart instantly on alert. "I know it must be hard to rehearse without the music," Scarlett continued. "So, I had a special transcription made for you, for the song I chose." She took Lila's hand and placed a set of thick sheets in it, the surface covered in raised dots. It was a score in Braille. For a moment the gesture seemed genuinely thoughtful, but then Lila's fingers, which still held the fluent memory of reading music, began to glide over the first page. Her blood ran cold. Her fingers recognized the structure, the title, the rhythmic notation. It was no simple song. It was the score for Nessun Dorma, the iconic aria from the opera Turandot. A piece of volcanic power, famous for its breathtaking difficulty and triumphant high note at the end, written for the lung power of a dramatic tenor. It was an impossible challenge, a piece designed to break even seasoned opera singers. For her, with no recent classical training and a female voice, it was an invitation to disaster. Lila turned pale, the sheets feeling as heavy as a tombstone in her hands. She understood the depth of Scarlett's malice. It wasn't just to make her sing badly, it was to have her be obliterated. Scarlett watched the shock on Lila's face, savoring every second of her silent terror. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she leaned in and whispered, "I know it's a challenge, but I believe in you." She gave Lila's shoulder a little pat. "I'm sure you'll manage just fine." And with that, she turned and left the room, leaving Lila alone with the physical proof dot by dot of the trap that awaited her. For Lila, the party didn't begin with lights, but with a sonic shockwave. A wall of pop music with a bass so heavy the marble floor vibrated under her feet, rising through her body like a fever. The sound was her only guide in that ocean of people, but it was also her enemy. The air was dense, suffocating, a cloying mix of hundreds of expensive perfumes, the smell of food and champagne. She felt like a ghost navigating an invisible battlefield. Bodies brushed past her, some bumping into her without apology. She was an obstacle, an object, a dissonant note in the symphony of teenage perfection. Snippets of conversation hit her like shrapnel. "My father's yacht in Monaco. Ridiculous, she wore the same dress as me." And then a whisper that passed too close, dripping with scorn. "Look, it's the blind maid. What is she doing here?" Every laugh was a knife. Every clinking glass was an alarm. She felt completely lost, an island of internal silence in the middle of a hurricane of external noise. Panic began to rise in her throat, cold and sharp. She stopped, unsure where to go, a prisoner in the middle of the whirlwind. That's when she felt it. A warm, firm touch on her arm, a hand that found hers with a gentle certainty. "Lila." Caleb's voice cut through the noise. "A safe harbor in the storm. Come with me." He guided her safely through the crowd, away from the epicenter of the loud music, until they found a small alcove near a door that led to the garden. The noise here was a more distant hum. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of a concern that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with friendship. "I don't know if I can do this, Caleb." Her voice came out trembling, confessing her fear of the performance to come. But the confession opened a floodgate to an even deeper truth. "I have nowhere to go if this goes wrong." Caleb stood in silence, listening. "My parents, they're gone," she continued, the words spilling out in a restrained torrent. "They used everything to keep me at Juilliard. When the sickness came, the medical bills took what was left. I was alone. The domestic employment agency was the only one that didn't see me as helpless." Her fingers tightened on his hand. "I came here to survive, Caleb. Just to survive. If I lose this..." She didn't have to finish the sentence. The scale of her desperation hung between them. She wasn't fighting for pride. She was fighting for a roof over her head. Caleb didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, his hand squeezed hers back, with a strength that was pure solidarity. "You're not in this alone," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I'm here with you." And in that small alcove, amid the chaos of a party designed to destroy her, Lila found a single point of light in her dark night, the strength of a friend. The relentless beat of the pop music stopped with a sudden, shocking absence. An expectant silence fell over the crowd, and a single, blinding white spotlight hit the small stage set up at the end of the hall. The time had come. Scarlett Harrison climbed the steps, her couture dress shimmering, and took the microphone with the confidence of someone born to be the center of attention. "Hey everyone! Thanks all for coming," she began, her voice projecting a perfectly rehearsed enthusiasm. Tonight, I wanted to do something different, something meaningful. I wanted to share with you all a moment of true inspiration. As she spoke, a sea of smartphones rose from the crowd. Hundreds of tiny lenses turned to the stage, ready to record. But the smiles on the guests' faces were not of admiration. They were of a predatory curiosity, the expectation of a train wreck, the kind of entertainment money can't usually buy. At the back of the hall, near the service door, Maria and Caleb watched, motionless. Maria clutched a small rosary in her hands, her knuckles white. Caleb's face was a mask of contained fury. Both of them, with their hearts in their throats, praying for a miracle. Tonight, Scarlett continued, her tone now falsely solemn, we have with us proof that courage and perseverance can bloom in the most unexpected places. Please, give a warm round of applause for our special feature. Leela! Her name echoed through the hall. Across the room, a tall, impassive security guard touched Lila's arm. It was the signal. The walk to the slaughter had begun. Every step was an eternity. The guard guided her with an impersonal firmness, clearing a path through the crowd that parted for them. And as the people separated, the whispers came. They followed her like knives, cutting through the thick air. It's the blind maid. What does she think she's doing? This is going to be hilarious. How humiliating! Lila kept her head held high, her face pale, trying to focus only on the guard's touch on her arm and the memory of Maria's words. Don't let her extinguish your light. But the whispers were like poison, trying to find a crack in her resolve to get in. Finally, they reached the base of the stage. The guard released her arm, stepped back, and left her. She was alone. In front of her, 3 small steps. Above, the heat of the spotlight on her face. And beyond, the heavy, judgmental silence of 200 people waiting for her to trip. Lila climbed the 3 steps with a calculated slowness, each step a small victory against the sea of whispers. Once on stage, she paused, disoriented by the heat of the spotlight and the oppressive silence of the crowd. Her hands reached out in front of her, searching for something, a point of reference on her island of exposed darkness. Her fingers finally found the cool, smooth wood of the grand piano. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. There it was, her one and only old friend in this nest of vipers. She moved to the side, found the bench, and sat, the gesture giving her a fragile sense of control. That's when she sensed a presence approaching, Scarlett's expensive perfume, followed by the soft rustle of her dress dragging across the stage. To the audience, it looked like an encouraging gesture from the hostess. To Lila, it was the final approach of the predator. Scarlett leaned in, her face close to Lila's, her hair brushing her cheek. The audience saw a sweet smile and whispers of good luck. What Lila heard was pure venom, a hissing stream of air in her ear. "Don't disappoint me," Scarlett whispered, her voice so low it was barely a sound. "Show everyone just how talented you are." She pulled back an inch, just enough for her next blow to land squarely. "Try not to trip on your way out." Lila flinched, a shiver running down her spine, but she kept her face impassive, a mask of neutrality that took all of her strength. Straightening up, the smile still on her face for the audience, Scarlett performed her final act of cruelty. She took the heavy Braille score that Lila had left on the bench and, with a theatrical and overly careful gesture, placed it on the music stand, right in front of Lila. A final gesture that said to everyone, "See how thoughtful I am." But to Lila, it was the public display of the murder weapon. With a condescending pat on Lila's shoulder, Scarlett turned and descended from the stage, walking like a queen to her seat in the front row, next to her proud and oblivious father. Lila was left alone. The silence in the room was now absolute, heavy. Under the heat of the spotlight, in front of a piano that knew her soul, sat the score for an impossible song, the final proof of the perfectly executed trap. 200 pairs of eyes watched her, waiting for the first sound of her fall. The silence in the hall was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. Lila sat at the piano, feeling the heat of the spotlight on her face and the weight of 200 pairs of eyes waiting for the show. The opera, the disaster, the humiliation. Scarlett's whisper still echoed in her ear, a slow-acting poison. For an instant, fear threatened to swallow her whole. The abyss Maria had warned her about was right in front of her. She took a deep breath. The air seemed to have no oxygen. Her fingers, as if by instinct, rose and touched the Braille score on the stand. She felt the small, raised dots under her fingertips. Nessun dorma. Every dot was a taunt. Every measure, a step to the gallows. Her fingers weren't reading notes. They were reading the anatomy of the trap, the signature of Scarlett's cruelty. And then, something changed. A flash of memory. The proud, invincible face she herself had worn at Juilliard. Another. Scarlett's cruel laughter in the hallway. And a final one. The warm touch of Maria's hand, and Caleb's firm voice saying, "I'm here with you." The victim, the musician, the ghost, the survivor. It all collided inside of her. She would not sing their song. She would not dance to the melody of humiliation. If she was going to fall, it wouldn't be into that abyss. It would be off her own cliff, in a flight of her own choosing. Her fingers pulled back from the score. With a calm, fluid, and unmistakably deliberate motion, Lila raised her right hand and pushed the sheets of paper aside. They slid off the stand and fluttered to the stage floor with a soft rustle, a sound that was shockingly loud in the absolute silence. A murmur went through the crowd. In the front row, Scarlett's smile wavered, replaced by a scowl of confusion. At the back, Caleb and Maria held their breath, a mix of terror and wild hope in their eyes. In that moment, the stage was no longer a trap. It became her sanctuary. The darkness around her was no longer a prison. It was her home, her universe. And in it, she was the only star. She was no longer the blind maid, the victim. She was the musician that Juilliard once knew, and she was about to remind herself, and the world, who she really was. Lila straightened her back. Her hands, now steady, hovered over the piano keys. The silence from the crowd was no longer of mockery. It was of bewilderment. And at the center of it all, for the first time in 2 years, Lila felt completely at home. Lila's hands landed on the keys. The crowd's silence was now a vacuum, stripped of mockery, filled only with a collective bewilderment. And then, she played. The first note fell into the room like a single raindrop on a dark lake, then another, and another. A melancholy and hauntingly beautiful melody began to form, a song no one there had ever heard. It wasn't the operatic explosion of Nessun Dorma. It was something more intimate, more fragile, more true. It was the sound of Lila's soul, the melody she had composed in the darkness of her room, the same one Maria had kept as a secret, now unfolded for everyone. It was a song about the loss of colors, about the memory of light, but also about the strength found in the shadows. Then, she sang. Her voice began as a trembling thread of sound, a whisper so delicate the audience leaned forward to hear it. It was a voice that carried the weight of every unshed tear, of every broken dream. There was such a raw vulnerability in that initial sound that the air in the room seemed to grow denser, heavier. But as the music swelled, something shifted. The thread of sound began to grow stronger, fuller. The hesitation in her voice gave way to a crystalline clarity, a purity that cut through the luxurious room like a diamond. She was no longer just singing about the darkness. She was singing from within it, using it as a resonance chamber for her pain and her strength. At the song's peak, her voice rose, full and powerful, and the story she was telling became clear to everyone. They took the colors, took the light, left me with an endless night, but in the echoes, in the dark, I found the beating of my heart. It was in that moment that the transformation was complete. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes of humiliation, Lila's voice soared even higher, a force of nature no one there could have predicted. It was no longer a lament. It was a flame that burned away the mockery, that melted the contempt and purified the air of all malice. Every note was a declaration of her existence, a refusal to be erased. The stage, once a trap, was now an altar, and Lila was not the victim. She was the high priestess, channeling 2 years of pain, loneliness, and resilience into a torrent of pure, overwhelming sound. She closed her unseeing eyes, completely lost in her art, giving everything she had. The last note of Lila's song hung in the air, shimmering for an instant before dissolving into the most absolute silence the hall had ever known. No one moved. No one breathed. The music's spell still held them captive. The camera begins to pan slowly across the audience, capturing the emotional devastation left by the performance. The sneers, once so prominent, had vanished from the teenagers' faces, replaced by an expression of pure shock. Jaws had dropped. The phones, which had been raised to capture a joke, now recorded in silence, with a newfound reverence, as if documenting a historic event. Scarlett's friends, sitting in the front row, were pale. They looked at each other with wide eyes, confusion written on their faces. The humiliation they had expected to see had turned into a triumph they couldn't process. The script had been flipped, and they no longer knew their role. Among the older guests, the emotion was even more visible. A woman in extravagant jewelry discreetly dabbed a tear from the corner of her eye. A stern-faced executive who hadn't smiled all night stared at the stage with an expression of deep, moved admiration. They were old enough to recognize the truth when they heard it. At the back, Maria's and Caleb's tears were not of sadness, but of a fierce, overflowing joy. They saw on the stage not the maid, but the phoenix who had risen from the ashes Scarlett had so carefully prepared. Finally, the camera lands on Mr. Harrison. He was paralyzed, his face gray, but his gaze wasn't on Lila. His eyes moved with a terrified slowness from Lila to the fallen opera score on the stage floor, and then to the now frozen, insecure smile on his own daughter's face. Sitting beside him, he was connecting the dots. The forced generosity of the invitation, the choice of an impossible song, and the raw, undeniable soul he had just witnessed. For the first time, he didn't see his spoiled little girl. He saw the architecture of a cruelty he never imagined existed. In that instant, Mr. Harrison looked as if he was seeing a ghost, the ghost of his daughter's true nature, and that of his own terrible negligence. The silence in the room was the sound of his world falling apart. The tense silence that followed Mr. Harrison's revelation was broken by a single sound. A pair of hands, clapping, slow, deliberate. It came from one of the older guests. Then a second pair of hands joined, then a third, and in an instant, what was a trickle became a flood. The room exploded into a thunderous ovation, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the mansion walls. People rose from their chairs one by one, until everyone was on their feet, their eyes fixed on Lila, the applause turning into a roar of approval and admiration. It was a verdict. For Lila, the sound was a wave of warmth and validation that enveloped her on the stage. For Scarlett, it was the sound of her own humiliating defeat. She watched from the front row, her face twisting into a mask of fury and envy. The color rose in her neck. Lila's triumph was a mirror reflecting her spectacular failure. The stage was hers. The party was hers. The humiliation was supposed to be Lila's. That adoration did not belong to her. In a move fueled by panic and rage, Scarlett stood up abruptly. "Dad, do something!" she hissed at Mr. Harrison, who was still looking at her with that new, terrible understanding. Ignoring her father, she ran towards the stage, not with the grace of a hostess, but with the clumsy fury of a dethroned queen. She climbed the steps and marched toward a stunned Lila, who could barely process the wave of applause. Scarlett snatched the microphone from its stand. "Okay, thank you!" Her shouted voice sounded shrill and ugly over the speakers, cutting through the acclaim. "That's enough! The performance is over!" For a moment the applause wavered as guests turned, shocked by the rude intervention. But it was too late. The wave of emotion was too great to be contained by a childish command. The applause returned, now mixed with murmurs of disapproval aimed at Scarlett. She was on stage, at the center of attention, but for the first time in her life, the power was not with her. She had lost control of her own narrative, of her own party. She had tried to extinguish Lila's light, but had only ended up exposing herself in the shadow of her own failure. On stage, Scarlett held the microphone, her face red with fury, as the applause for Lila finally began to die down, replaced by a confused and disapproving murmur from the crowd. She opened her mouth to try and speak again, to try, somehow, to reverse the tide of her own humiliation, but no words came out. Instead, a loud, sudden feedback screech echoed from the expensive speakers spread throughout the hall and garden. At the back of the room, near the soundboard, Caleb stepped back, his face tense, watching the sound tech who, with headphones on and a grim expression, had just connected his phone to the main system. Caleb had suspected Scarlett's intentions days earlier, and during a moment when she was showing off to her friends by the pool, he had left his phone nearby, recording. He had hoped he would never have to use it. But Scarlett, by climbing onto the stage, had forced his hand. The screeching stopped, and then a voice filled the silence. A voice everyone recognized, but in a way they had never heard before. It was Scarlett's voice, but intimate, conspiratorial, and dripping with malice. The recording was crystal clear. "No, seriously, it's going to be epic. I'm going to put the little blind girl on stage with an impossible song. Everyone is going to laugh. It will be the highlight of my party." Her voice, followed by the shrill sound of her friends' laughter, hung in the air for a second of deadly silence. What followed was a collective gasp of horror, a sharp, unified "oh" that rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. 200 pairs of eyes, which moments before had been on Lila with admiration, now turned to Scarlett with absolute disgust and disbelief. The phones, still in hand, now framed the birthday girl. The hunter had become the prey. Mr. Harrison, who was already pale, seemed to age 10 years. The irrefutable proof, cruelty in its purest form, spoken in his own daughter's voice, hit him like a physical blow. On stage, Lila heard the words and felt the seismic shift in the atmosphere. There was no triumph in her expression, only a deep sadness at the confirmation of that hatred. But all eyes were on Scarlett. She froze, the microphone slipping from her hand and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her face, once red with rage, was now white as wax. She was trapped by her own voice, naked under the spotlight of her own malice. Exposed. Defeated. The silence that followed the recording was heavier and uglier than any before. In it, the first to move was Mr. Harrison. He rose from his front-row chair, not with the agility of a businessman, but with the weight of a judge walking to deliver a sentence. Every step he took toward the stage was deliberate, and the crowd parted for him as if before a force of nature. As he climbed the steps, his gaze never left his daughter's pale, terrified face. The disappointment in his eyes was so deep, so cutting, it was a punishment in itself. He didn't say a word to her. He just bent down and picked up the microphone she had dropped. He rose to his full height, power and authority returning to him, but now tinged with a cold fury and an overwhelming shame. He turned to the shocked audience. "The party is over." His voice resonated through the hall. Not loud, but with a steely authority that allowed for no argument. "I ask you all to leave. Now." There were no protests. The guests, sensing the weight of the family disgrace, began to move silently toward the exits, their gazes shifting between the exposed girl on the stage and the father who was judging her. Then, as the room began to empty, Mr. Harrison did the hardest thing. He turned his back on his daughter and approached Lila, who remained near the piano, trembling, completely overwhelmed by the events of the last hour. He stopped at a respectful distance. The fury in his face gave way to a mask of deep remorse. He was looking at the girl his daughter had tried to destroy, but also at the reflection of his own colossal failure. "Miss," he said, his voice lower now, but still clear in the microphone so that all who remained could hear. "On behalf of my family, I apologize. He paused, the weight of those words filling the space. What you did tonight was not just singing. It was an act of courage and genius that I will never forget. The public apology was the final sentence. Scarlett, hearing her father validate the person she tried to annihilate, finally crumbled, a dry sob escaping her lips. The judgment was complete. The ballroom, once a whirlwind of music and mockery, now emptied into an awkward silence. Guests hurried out, avoiding eye contact, their gossip reduced to hasty whispers. On stage, the sound crew was already dismantling the equipment, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Lila had been guided to a corner by Maria, who wrapped a shawl around her, trying to shield her from the cold and the shock that was now taking over her body. She was still shaking. Amid the exodus of guests, a well-dressed man with graying hair and an air of quiet authority moved against the current. He wasn't fleeing the scene of the disaster. He was walking toward its epicenter. He stopped respectfully in front of Lila and Maria. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and deep. "Miss, my name is Julian Vance." The name meant nothing to Lila, but Maria gasped. Even she, who was not in the music world, had heard of the legendary producer. Mr. Vance ignored Maria's reaction and addressed only Lila, with a respect she hadn't received in years. "What you did on that stage tonight," he began, searching for the words. "That wasn't a performance. It was a revelation." He took a business card from his jacket pocket. With a gentle gesture, he took Lila's hand and placed the small, firm rectangle of paper in her palm. "Call me tomorrow," he said, his voice making it clear it was not a casual invitation, but a professional instruction. "The world needs to hear your voice." He gave a polite nod and turned, disappearing into the departing crowd as smoothly as he had arrived. Lila stood there, feeling the raised print of the name and number on the card with her fingertips. It was the first tangible piece of a future she thought had been stolen forever. Amid the ruins of Scarlett's party, a door had been opened, and so, on the stage built for her destruction, Lila found the foundation for her new life. Scarlett's trap, in the end, had transformed into the greatest stage she had ever had. Hours later, the opulence of the party had been reduced to the silence of a stainless steel kitchen. The only sound was the kettle Maria was preparing for tea. Lila, Caleb, and Maria sat around the large central table, a small island of exhausted humanity. The producer's business card lay on the table next to Lila's hand, an almost sacred object. The door opened and Mr. Harrison walked in. The three of them stiffened, the habit of hierarchy slow to die. But the man who entered was not the tycoon, the boss. He was a father with slumped shoulders, his face marked by an exhaustion that went beyond tiredness. For the first time, he looked like a humble man. "May I sit?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Maria nodded, and he pulled out a chair, sitting at the table with his employees, breaking an invisible rule that had governed that house for years. He looked at his own hands on the table for a long moment before speaking. "There are no excuses for what happened today," he began, addressing no one in particular. "For what I allowed to happen." He finally lifted his gaze to Lila. "I failed my daughter." In a deep and unforgivable way. There was a genuine pain in his voice, but then his tone shifted. It became focused, intense, that of a CEO resolving a crisis. "But I will not fail a talent like yours," he said, now with a new determination. "What I am proposing is not an apology, miss. It's a partnership. Your employment contract here is terminated. Starting tomorrow, you will work for yourself. I will finance everything. The best vocal coaches to help you readjust. The best studio. The best producers. The guest house is yours, for as long as you need it." Lila, Maria, and Caleb stared at him, stunned at the scale of the offer. "I can't fix what I did with Scarlett in one night," he said, his voice laced with an almost desperate intensity. "But I can fix this. Let me fix this." The offer was a lifeboat, a galaxy of stars offered to her after years of darkness. It was everything. But the weight of that everything, the intensity in Mr. Harrison's gaze, sent a shiver down Lila's spine. She wasn't just being helped. She was becoming the redemption project of a powerful man. With few other options, she just nodded, unable to form words. That night, in the quiet of a kitchen, amid the ruins of a girl's cruelty, the foundations of something new were laid. Lila lost a job but gained a career. And more than that, she found the cornerstones of a new family, built on respect, kindness, and the redeeming power of music. Lila's hand, now steady, finds the phone and dials the number on the business card. Hope is a new, fragile feeling, a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. The scene changes to an office with a glass wall, hovering over the city. Lila is sitting across from Mr. Vance. The producer smiles, a smile of genuine admiration. Your story, your voice. It's the kind of truth you don't see anymore. I want to offer you a recording contract, Lila. A full album. The hope in Lila's chest blooms, so real she can almost touch it. It's the validation, the second chance, everything she had dared to dream of. But Vance's smile fades, replaced by a serious expression. However, he says, the word hanging in the air, I have to be honest. Our lives have crossed before. I was on the judging panel at the Juilliard Winter Competition 3 years ago. The memory hits Lila like a lightning bolt. The day of her greatest victory, the day of her greatest pride. There was another pianist, Vance continues. A fragile but brilliant girl named Anna. You destroyed her on stage with your talent. And then, backstage, you destroyed her with your words. The memory returns sharply to Lila. The disdain in her own voice. The crushed look on the girl's face. Anna was my goddaughter. She never played in a competition again. You didn't just break her spirit, Lila. You broke her music. He leans forward. The contract is yours. Your talent is undeniable. But genius without compassion is a destructive force. Our future can only begin when you fix your past. Find her. Heal what you broke. Prove you're the artist your music says you are. Then, and only then, do we have a deal. The weight of that new and unexpected penance falls on Lila, heavier than any humiliation she had ever suffered. In a state-of-the-art recording studio, Lila's voice once again fills the space, pure and powerful, recording her song. For a moment, she is free, in her element. But the control room door opens and Mr. Harrison enters. Not alone, but with a marketing team. It's genius, Lila. Genius, he says over the intercom, his face beaming. But these gentlemen think, and I agree, that the chorus could be more universal, more commercial. A young man in a suit approaches the glass, smiling. Your comeback story is the product, Lila. The music is the packaging. We've drafted some lyrics that really sell that message of hope. They slide a sheet of paper into the studio. New words, empty, optimistic words that were not hers. The gratitude on Lila's face battles with a growing sense of claustrophobia. The bars of the golden cage, forged with the best of intentions, begin to close around her. But there are moments of purity. In a park, Caleb tunes a small radio. Suddenly, the first chords of Lila's piano echo. It's the first time. A smile of genuine joy explodes on both their faces. It's real. Her music, in the world. We see a computer screen. Echoes in the Dark by Lila is climbing the charts. The success is undeniable, but the final image is of Lila in her new home. On the table in front of her, Vance's business card, a reminder of her moral debt. Beside it, the corporate lyrics from Mr. Harrison, a reminder of her artistic battle. Her first war was for survival. The next would be for her soul. She picks up the phone. Elsewhere, Caleb's phone rings and he answers, his voice warm and ready. I'm here. She no longer needed someone to show her the light. She would have to become the light herself. Lila's story shows us that our greatest vulnerability can become our greatest strength. How many times have we ourselves underestimated someone, having no idea of the power they held inside? The truth, when it's revealed, has the power to shock everyone. And if you think the twist in Lila's life is surprising, Wait until you see what happens when a man kicks out his wife while she's in labor for his lover, only to find out the woman he scorned had a $20 million secret. Her revenge story is unbelievable. Click the video on the screen and prepare to be shocked all over again.